Hey Dave, how you doing today?
I am doing great. How are you, Nick?
Fantastic. Podcasting on a Monday after a nice
Uh,
long weekend.
Yet we are still fantastic.
And I'm only fantastic because we have decided this week to outsource a lot of our work and research once again to our associate advisor, Cole. So you and I just kind of stand here and ask questions this morning, right?
I love it. I love it. So
Yeah,
much
I'm
in life
seeing
should
a
work.
I'm seeing a theme building here, guys.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are we discussing today, Mr. Cole? What's on your mind?
Well, today we are going to be discussing, I guess, investment fraud, broadly speaking. Obviously, living in the internet age, there are all kinds of frauds and scams being run all the time, and unfortunately, they tend to target retirees more than any other demographic. So, as responsible financial planners, we feel like it is our duty to make sure that we bring up these topics from time to time to keep people from getting scammed and losing all their money.
Absolutely, and we did do a little bit of pre-work for this, and I did find I've actually been it's been going around a little bit in terms of fraud, and fraud is actually up the last couple of years. The Federal Trade Commission just put out a snapshot of 2023, and they're reporting 2.6 million fraud reports and 10 billion in reported lost assets. So it is real. It is increasing, it is ever present. And, I think twofold on that before you get into some of the stuff that you did, Cole. One is, times are getting a little bit harder, right? And that we always kind of see an uptick in
Trickier.
crime. And two, AI has started to make things a little bit easier, right? Like one of the big things, I was listening to Christine Benz's podcast this morning, kind of on this topic. And one of the things that there was a lady who's kind of in charge of fraud for AARP on there, and they were interviewing her. And one of the things that was interesting, like before, it used to be you'd get this bad, broken English email. Well, now we have ChatGPT, right? Like that stuff goes away pretty quickly when you have a free resource to go out there and do the writing for you. You don't necessarily have to know the language. And so that, along with obviously, we're seeing a lot more in the banking world with like fake voices, that kind of thing. Like that stuff is becoming more and more real. And it's more and more important to be vigilant than kind of ever before.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. And not only with the Chat GPT written scripts is it's becoming a bigger issue, but I don't know if you guys remember a year or two ago, Google did a really big presentation on their AI assistant, where I believe the example that they gave was it had the like you can tell your whatever your Google phone to order Chinese from my local spot and I want kung pao chicken and fried rice. And the assistant will call the local restaurant and have a legitimate conversation like a normal human with the person on the other phone and like get your order for you. So that is becoming a really
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
interesting reality as well as you can think that you're on the phone with somebody who's Mark from Peoria, Illinois, who's just looking to help you out with Bank of America, and it is not. So you have to be really vigilant these days.
Well, not to mention like how much better they're getting at that, but also like now the time factor goes out, right? You don't have to have a bunch of real live people on the other end if you can just
Hmm.
Yeah.
employ artificial intelligence, just like email, to just spam as many people as you can and see how far you get.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about volume. Yeah.
Yeah, for
It
sure.
definitely is. Well, one of the first things I wanted to talk about in particular, because we are in an election year, is that political donation fraud is a very real
Yes.
thing. There's actually a report from the Campaign Legal Center from a little bit earlier this year that there were two big scam packs, is what they're calling them, that were being investigated. And effectively, what these are obviously scammers, robocallers, people that use AI. I think that the specific example was they were using a voice to impersonate President Trump and
Okay.
trying to garner donations that way, which is
Interesting.
obviously interesting.
Right.
But it just goes to show that if you are looking to make any sort of political donation, it's probably best to not do it through the person that just called you.
Yeah.
There
Right.
are better avenues for doing that, and
Check the box on your ballot or on your tax return, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Or as previously mentioned, if you are looking to make some sort of a donation or any sort of financial transaction, it's better to call the actual number for whatever it is,
Yes.
Bank of America, J.P. Morgan Chase, the Democratic Party, whatever, and just verify the legitimacy of either who you were talking to, or just do it straight up through their website, or just call them and they can handle the transaction that way. Because
Yes.
clearly what these people are looking to do is, if you are looking to donate $20 to your favorite candidate and you're willing to give out your credit card information, well, then congratulations, they have all your money. So,
Yeah.
and like we said, if you can use AI scripts and AI voices to do this, I mean, you can call hundreds, thousands of people at a time, and if they can get a couple bites in a day, that's a lot of money. So,
Well, and talk about like the most recognizable voice in the world. Like, how many
yeah,
impersonators of that
Right.
voice have there been? Most people probably even know what he sounds like anymore because there,
yeah,
so many different
Yeah.
variations of it going around. But everybody can recognize his voice, right? Like, and his
yeah,
speech patterns.
yep,
So,
yep,
so the same basic principle applies. If someone calls you about anything financial related, ask if you can call them back.
Yeah.
Get a
hmm
callback number, right?
yep,
And doesn't matter if it's your bank, the credit union down the street, or somebody asking you to drop $20 into a campaign coffer. Ask if you can call them back. Get their phone number. Verify it. Then carry on.
yeah. Yeah, well, and I guess to getting into some of the more general scammer tactics, which is important to go over, because once you recognize, especially these four that we're going to bring up today, it becomes a lot easier to detect if a scam is an actual scam or if it's truly just an employee looking to help you out. But one of the major ones is that they're trying to almost pressure you immediately. So they're trying to create some sort of emotional problem, some sort of a you're in trouble with the law, you owe back taxes, whatever you want
Yeah.
to prize, but
Your
you have to
benefits
act
are
on it
about to
now.
stop. Yeah.
Yes, yes, but it has to happen now. And
Yeah.
one of the big things you have to realize is any sort of legitimate organization, especially a financial organization, is never going to call you and say that unless you act within the next 2 hours that the world's going to end. Like, that's just not how it works. So, same thing with the political stuff or anything is like if they're trying to either on an email or over the phone try to get you to do something right now because Armageddon is going to happen, then it's probably a scam.
Yeah, and just preying on that, heightened emotional state and really trying to get you to do something that you normally wouldn't do, right?
hmm
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's criminal enterprise 101, right? Like they've been doing that part of it, the emotional part of it for hundreds of years, I'm sure.
Right. And consider your own emotional state too. And so, you're busy, you're in the middle of something, your phone rings, we answer it because we can't ignore it.
Right.
And all you want to do is get off the phone, right?
hmm
Yeah. Well, we
So,
talked about it a little bit before too, Dave, but it's a numbers game, right? So like,
mhm,
they're trying to catch that one person in that one time of weakness and that,
right,
so they just keep
right.
going and going until they get to them.
And hoping you're too polite to just hang up on them.
Right. Well, and you might, and the other thing too is, you in a normal state of mind, you might be fine at like detecting this and thinking twice, but it's going to
Yes.
happen to you multiple times because they know at one point they might get you in that weak point. And so you really have
Yes.
to recognize that even though most of the time you'll probably figure it out, like if you're in a heightened emotional state, that might not be the case.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is I think that in years prior, the scamming industry, quote unquote, was a lot more prone to be just kind of some guy in his living room. But today, I mean, it is a massive multi-billion-dollar operation that happens globally, and there are office buildings worth of call centers worth of people with scripts and technology where their entire job all day is just to try to get you to slip up that one time and they can get all of your money. So I think that if people can understand it through that frame, that I mean there are predatory people that is their whole thing. Then I think that it can kind of turn off that I just want to be polite. I don't want to be mean. Kind of that, especially around these parts, the Midwest mentality. It can kind of, lay that at ease a little bit, and you can be a little bit more stringent and maybe a little bit more serious and mean than your normal Michigander or someone from Indiana or Ohio may may normally be.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's interesting too in doing some of the research leading up to this. Obviously, we see a lot of targets around people who are retired, and there's really good reasons for that, right? Like in terms of like cognitive decline, we know like the numbers, the stats of like that starts to go down the older you get, right? Which makes sense, and so that's maybe an easier target, but also those are the people that you're getting bigger quote unquote scores from, because that tends to be where the wealth leads. But what was interesting to me is there's a lot of younger people that are also getting wrapped up into this too. So it's not like you can't
Yeah,
just be
that
like, well, I'm
surprised
not
me.
old, I'm not going to be a target, so I don't worry about it. Like pretty much everybody across the board age wise is getting hit and falling for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, and that leads further into, investment scams more broadly, is that we do live in the era of Robinhood and of Coinbase and of all kinds of different ways that young people can get involved in investing, legitimate and illegitimate. And so, some of those different schemes, obviously, like Ponzi schemes, have been along for a very long time. Things like pump and dumps are not new, but are much more prevalent these days, especially with all kinds of, you know, pardon my French, but the shit coins, as they're called, right? Like the Dogecoin and all kinds of. I mean, there's millions of different little crypto coins that are worth fractions of a fraction of a penny. But the thought process for a lot of younger people is that if you can get in on one of these coins like right before a celebrity posts about it or whatever, is that in theory you can get in at the perfect time and it's going to skyrocket 1,000% in a day. You can sell it all and you can get like rich super quick. But the reality is that almost anybody that thinks that they're in the know on those sorts of things, like you're the sucker, right? Like you're the person that
Hmm.
they're going to take your liquidity and they're going to run with your cash. So that there are lots of different ways that especially young people, as you mentioned, are really getting got these days.
Yeah, and I think so. In looking at the AARP article that I mentioned earlier, and we'll have to put this in the show notes as well, but like the common types of fraud that we're seeing out there right now, you talked about one of them, which is cryptocurrency. And I think that one makes sense for both younger people of like that opportunity, but also older people because they don't quite understand necessarily how it works. Although I would argue that younger people don't either. It's a different podcast for a different day, Cole.
Yes.
But just the prevalence of like if you think back to the Super Bowl a couple years ago when it was all over the Super Bowl, now it's like this mainstream thing that people like are a little bit more of accepting of it and think it's like out there and real, but don't understand the like how it works and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So we've seen a lot of that. Foreign exchange is another one where people just don't necessarily understand it. There's what's called guaranteed buyback, which is, I like how they summed it up in this article, which was, here we'll give you our seeds and we'll buy back your plants kind of thing, right? Where they're guaranteeing you to, pay you in the future for the investment a certain amount over what you originally put in as a minimum. We've seen precious metals, commodities trading, real estate, and I guess to me, like the big thing that kind of triggers all of these is people kind of know of them, but they don't necessarily know how they work. They're complicated. You think it should be a good thing because you've heard about it before, but you don't really understand it. And so I think that's a way to kind of get in and get that emotional heightened situation where you're willing to do things without actually going through the thought process of like, how is this going to work? Is this legitimate? Those kind of things.
Well, and the other thing to consider too is like if this is this incredible investment opportunity, why are they contacting me?
Right. That's
I mean,
one of my favorite things to point out to people is if I could write the newsletter that had all the answers, you wouldn't know my name and I wouldn't be writing
Yeah,
mhm,
it.
it's the truth.
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. If it's such a good deal, they wouldn't be selling it to you,
Yep.
right? They
I'd be
just
on.
hold on to it.
Yep.
Yep, yep, I agree. Well, and so I guess another really important thing to pay attention to is, and you definitely mentioned it with the cryptocurrency, but even further is a huge red flag is if they don't want you to pay them with like a check or with cash or some sort of kind of traditional bank transfer is
Uh-huh.
huge.
Yeah.
Definitely cryptocurrency is a really big one. Gift cards, especially like Google Play Store, like Apple gift cards, the Visa gift cards. I think it's like the vanilla or all those sorts of things where you can load up $500 on a card and give them the barcode or something like that. I mean, that's the massive, like the biggest of red flags you
Right.
could ever have are those sorts of
Right.
things, but people
Right.
do fall for those.
Right. The IRS is not going to ask you to pay your back taxes in Amazon cards.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
this is correct. Yes, but and it's funny, obviously it is because it seems so silly, but unfortunately, like a lot of people do fall for these things, and
Yes.
as Nick mentioned, it's almost always in a place where you are a little bit maybe emotionally compromised in some way, or you're in a rough spot, or if you're an older person, potentially, amnesia, dementia, things like that do creep in, and there's a reason why they contact people, and they cast that really broad fishing net, just hoping to catch one, because one is all that they need.
Yeah,
Exactly.
for sure. So I did have a list of some tips to avoid these scams, which I thought was pretty good as kind of a starting to educate yourself around like what should I be thinking about. One of the first ones, which kind of seems common sense to me because I'm in the industry, but most people probably don't even know this exists, and it's especially for how it works in investment scams, and that is to check the credentials, right? So there is broker check through FINRA, and there's advisor info through the SEC. And the majority of the time when you are when there's an investment scam going on, it's from somebody that's not licensed. So when you go and you put their name in there, they're not going to show up, and that should be like red flag number one, obviously, right? um, so I think that's good. The second one on the list was look for transparency, right? Like, what can you show me? What can you share with me? Although that's getting harder and harder nowadays with how good AI is to like fake some of that stuff. But like that's a big one. And then the third one, which is kind of what we talked about earlier, which is take your time, right? Like ask for a callback, think it through, check, just ha- get into a different emotional state when you're making that decision, right? Like if it's too good to be true and it's going away, then that means it's probably, something that it's probably not the lifetime opportunity that they're making you believe it is, right? So take some time, calm yourself, think it through. There's no reason. And one of the things I love about this industry is there's really no reason to, like, there's no hard deadlines, right? Like nothing's going to
Right.
change between today and tomorrow with legitimate investment, planning and things like that.
Right.
Have
Yeah.
a sandwich, take a nap,
Yeah.
think about it.
Yep. And then
Ask them to send you stuff.
yeah, for sure. The fourth one is get a reality check. So, check in with somebody who's not related to the transaction, right? Like if
Right.
you are talking to someone who you think is legitimate, talk to get a second opinion, right? Call a different fiduciary advisor and say, hey, am I thinking about this? Does that make sense? I know I'm going to speak for you, Dave, because I like to, but if somebody, reached out to our office and wanted us to look at something, we'd be the first ones to tell them like, yeah, this makes sense. It's legitimate. Or,
Right.
your way, go to the police station, that kind of thing. We're happy to do those sorts of things. I know most advisors, legitimate advisors, would
Well,
be willing to do that. And then I think the fifth one too is good advice, which is know your limitations, right? Which is like, hey, if this is a really good investment and it has a great return, it could be legitimate, but with great return comes great risk, right? The higher the return potential, the
right.
higher the risk. So make sure that you understand, like, if it is legitimate, you can afford to lose that money. You're not like mortgaging your house type of thing.
So, so Jason Zweig at the Wall Street Journal just did a great piece on that exact aspect of financial scams a couple of weeks ago. I had it flagged for our September headlines podcast, but it's probably a good place to talk about it now. And that's with interest rates coming down, all of the scams around high guaranteed rates that he was
Mm-hmm.
seeing. And he actually had friends give him a couple that they found where they were guaranteeing 15%, 17% risk free returns. And so back to what you said, I guess, I wouldn't expect every client out there to be able to put that in context. Like, what's a
Right.
ridiculous return for a risk free asset? I mean, we
Right.
hear 17% and we just, that's a ridiculous return with all the risk.
Right.
So, if you do see something like that, by all means, let us know. Jason Zweig, bless his heart, he actually ran these down, like reached out to these websites that were advertising these rates,
Yeah.
and lo and behold, it wasn't what it seemed. We'll just leave it. We'll just leave it at that. But just beware. If it smells too good to be true, it's too good to be true.
Yeah. Well, and just to go back to our point earlier about, like, think of the timing of that, right? Like everybody's worried
hmm
about interest rates are coming
Oh, what
down
should I
now,
do with
right?
my cash has
So
been
how
like
do I
the number one question lately. Yeah.
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 It's like
Oh,
how to lock in now the interest rates are going down.
yeah.
Like, what do I do?
Yeah. So people are susceptible to that, even if it's like those rates were ridiculous, but even if it's more than what you see from your local bank, you need to stop and ask yourself why.
Right. Exactly.
And it may be that there's some legitimate things that are there, but just ask yourself why.
Yep, and even if it is legitimate, like worst case scenario is you took your time, you made a good decision. Like that's like I said, there's no like financial hard deadlines of like that rate isn't mysteriously going to go away tomorrow, right? um, so a couple of really good resources that came out of AARP. They actually have a scam map, which I thought was interesting, where you can
Hmm.
go and put in like your zip code, and people will actually like report scams. So you can see like, hey, I just got this call, and I pull up the scam map, and oh, apparently I'm not the only one, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that's like a good first instinct of like this stuff is going around. It's going around in your area. So think it through. And then they also have what's called the thinking ahead roadmap, which is just kind of like a plan for if you're going to, do it yourself as far as like figuring out who's going to be the person as you age that makes decisions for you, how
Oh,
to think about that now, how to go through the process. And it's a roadmap of like, once you get to this stage, this piece of it. And once you are ready to kind of like hand over the day to day kind of maintenance of it. So it just walks you from like where you're at right now to where you may be in the future. And I think that's a
that
really great resource
sounds like a great topic in and of itself for us
for
to
sure.
explore. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So with that, Mr. Cole, any parting words of wisdom for our listeners here?
I would say the biggest one is, especially with emails, if you have something you think is even remotely fishy, don't click on anything.
Yes.
Because the
Yeah.
emails are loaded up with all kinds of click here, touch this, whatever,
Yes.
and the whole game is that if they can do that, then they can start to hook you in.
Yeah.
Take a breath. Don't let your emotions overtake you, as you've said, and you're 100% right. Is that if it is legitimate, it's going to be there tomorrow. You don't have to act on it right now, and just be willing to push back and to question. And if they don't like the fact that you're asking questions, you should probably hang up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you just to go back to your click thing too, like if you're not sure, you can always Google that phrase, and if it's legitimate, it will come up.
Exactly.
If it's not,
True.
you'll probably get something along the lines of this fraudulent email is going around.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
So, if our listeners have any questions for us or any scams that they're seeing going around or they've been involved in, would love for you to email us at info@srbadvisors.com so we can share that as well. As always, Dave, it has been a pleasure. Cole,
It's
good to
been
have you
fun.
on the show. We will, I'm sure, see you back soon.
Well, I love doing it. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.
This is a Zedia Media production.